and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
How has your week been so far?
Very, very, very busy, but I think I like it that way.
Okay, a warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday here from our global headquarters in Washington. Today we'll be talking about some interesting topics. We'll start in Kenya, maybe cross over to Uganda. And maybe if time allows, we'll talk about other interesting subjects on the continent. So Shaka, President Uhuru Kenyatta is in town. Yesterday he met with the US President Donald Trump. Maybe bring us up to speed. What did these guys talk about?
Are you sure he's still in town?
My understanding, he was supposed to leave today.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's already left, but he seems to have had a good time, really. Perhaps, in fact, a great time, because it looks like President Uhuru Kenyatta and President Donald Trump, it looks like they seem to have really sort of connected well. It looks like there might have been a chemistry. They had, of course, their significant others. We're talking about the first ladies of these two respective countries, who apparently, I don't know whether history was on my side, but probably this is one of the few moments, frankly, where these heads of states were also accompanied by their wives, their first ladies, to be, in fact, to be holding many minutes in a meeting, affecting, of course, their two respective nations.
I had an opportunity, along with my viewer colleagues, to interview President Uhuru Kenyatta on Sunday. And some of the things he talked about, he wanted to build on the relationship that Kenya has had with the United States in regard to, for example, fostering their trade ties. He talked about Kenya Airways flying directly from Kenya to New York, and a whole host of other issues, including security, of course, in Somalia, security around the Kenyan borders, and so many other things. What struck me, though, is Kenyatta seems to be genuine when he's talking about these trade deals. What do you gather?
What do you mean about seem to be genuine when he's talking about those deals?
Well,
this is real. I mean, for example, there is going to be an express highway between Mombasa and Nairobi. We're talking about probably one of the most important projects, really, in recent memory on the African continent. You're talking about a six lane highway between those two important, spots, really, because when you think about the many very heavy trucks that ply the route from the Kenyan, port city of Mombasa to Nairobi and onward to Uganda, to South Sudan, to Rwanda, to Democratic Republic of Congo, even to Burundi for that matter. This is very, very big, really. This could actually be a game changer, especially given that it will be complementing and supplementing the railway between Mombasa and Nairobi. And we're talking about an American company called Bechtel that is going to be actually, he's already signed a contract and all kind of stuff. It looks like we're talking about a lot of $1 billion here.
Yeah, it's supposed to cost about in the neighborhood of $3-something billion US dollars, and it's my understanding is that it's going to be prior to the SGR. It will be interesting to see what technology they bring that the Chinese didn't bring to Kenya.
This is very interesting because, frankly, if there is anything that Africa needs, it needs roads that connect, with these different countries. It needs railways and stuff like that so that the economy can take off. And this reminds me, of course, back when I was a kid reading books about a guy called Sir John Cecil Rhodes, who had this big dream. He actually dreamt about what they called the Cape to Cairo highway. Unfortunately, it remained in the dream. It was never realized. I think this is, in fact, where African leaders should be looking at. They should be looking at those types of infrastructure.
Shaka, President Uhuru Kenyatta considers you as a friend. What makes that guy tick?
Well, he considers me a friend because we've known each other before he became the #1 man in Kenya. I know some other members of his family. We're talking about, for example, his younger brother. The last time he was in town, talking about Muhoho. We had dinner. We had an exchange of social amenities. I also happen to be a very, very good friend of their big clan brother, Ngegi Muigai, in Nairobi. Whenever I'm in Nairobi, we hang out at the Intercontinental Hotel.
Interesting. Let's talk about something that happened in the news today in Kenya. The arrest and arraignment of the Deputy Chief Justice in Kenya, along with her lawyer. What do you make of those developments? Is this a retribution? Because during the campaign, the president said that he was going to fix these judges who had ruled in favor of the opposition. So could this be the fix that he was talking about?
But, let's face it, I'm sure before they took those kinds of steps, they must have had at least access to what they consider to be incontrovertible evidence. I have not seen it yet, but I'm sure it has to be there. It is not only the Deputy Chief Justice of Kenya that is actually facing the law. It looks like this business about tackling graft and corruption may in fact be real. Because let's face it, there are so many heads that have been rolling. Because when you think about Kenya, at one time, in fact, there was a saying in the international community that if you are rich in Kenya and you have a case, you don't have to worry about hiring a lawyer, for example, an attorney, because you know what? You can actually buy a judge. You can actually buy a judge. So I think it has that kind of negative image, and this image must change. But in order for my friend, President Uhuru, to be able to convince not only Kenyans, but perhaps Africans and the international community that he is serious, he probably also has to be able to be in a position where he has to account for what some people characterize as electoral injustice. Because in order for him to have the moral authority to move against some of these people, he really has to address that issue, electoral injustice.
So that's a very interesting point, the fact that you mentioned the president's name in this particular thing. A lot of people talk about, when they talk about corruption, they don't separate the first family from the corruption scandals in Kenya. Your take on that? I
don't frankly have any evidence, for example, that Uhuru, you could probably associate him with this or this or that. It is quite possible that he may be a very lucky individual who may have inherited a lot of property, a lot of assets from his family, from his father. After all, his father, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, was the founding president of Kenya, and there were a lot of cases which have never been resolved. But let's face it, for the last time I checked, when President Uhuru Kenyatta has been in power, I have not seen, again, any incontrovertible or hard evidence pointing to him. So I think you just can't speculate. You have to come up with some evidence. And I think that information is circulating around largely because it appears that he seems to be somehow distancing himself from his deputy president, William Ruto, where there is a lot of information that this man may very well, in fact, be in a situation where he could actually face the law because of the fact that he seems to have actually accumulated a lot of wealth in a very, very short time. A man seems to be like going through a marathon while sprinting, actually.
Let's cross over to Uganda. Let's talk about the release of Bobi Wine. Bobi Wine, after nearly more than a week in jail, he was released by the Ugandan government yesterday on bail. Bring us up to speed. What's the status of this young man and all the other legislators who are also facing charges of treason?
You know, from everything I have seen, he probably actually shouldn't be where he is right now. And that will also include really some of his colleagues, fellow legislators and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you think about it, it seems to me that Bobby Wine has actually benefited enormously from the fact that the state, at least according to a lot of people that I have interacted with, feel that the state has actually gone after him in a manner that is very difficult to justify. So to the extent that he happens to be a young man, again, whose future, frankly, is ahead of him, while, in fact, the man who happens to be in charge of Uganda for the last 32 years, people will tell you his future is behind him. He has also, of course, you know, in a situation like this, in a way, he has probably contributed enormously to the fact that you do have a situation here where Bobby Wine is the beneficiary of what I would characterize as a hugely exaggerated political attention, not only in Uganda, by the way, but regionally. You're talking about Kenya. You're talking about, in fact, I was talking with someone in Harare yesterday who was talking about the same thing. And even internationally, you have some groups in America, for example, who have rallied behind Bobby Wine's cause. You even have Africa's first recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature, Professor Wole Soyinka of Nigeria, precisely, saying, look, I think you should release this man. This man happens to be, whatever he is doing is within his constitutional rights, because this is not a man that is holding a gun. Whatever he's doing, frankly, is provided for in the Ugandan constitution. He's using his art, his music, as a means of social change, demanding for social change. And this is not really isolated to Bobby Wine. This seems to have drawn traction among the vast majority of Ugandans. Everybody, in fact, right now, from what I hear in terms of what I read, who you talk with, they seem to think that, in fact, when it comes to change, change should, in fact, have happened to Uganda yesterday, not today.
Shaka, let's go to some of our comments here. Let's start with Frank Muchibi on Facebook. He says, the rate at which Bobby Wine has been gaining support with the people, both in Uganda and abroad, has put the government into panic mode. No wonder he's facing such treatment. Shaka, would you agree?
Well, let's face it. First of all, you did have a case, against Bobby Wine that he allegedly happened to be in charge of weapons. We're talking about AK-47s here. And this, because of that, this man was initially tried by, or at least appeared in front of what is called a military court-martial. And this man has never been a soldier, to my knowledge. He's not a soldier. He probably shouldn't really have had any relationship with that type of, military type of, court-martial.
In fairness, the charges were dropped.
Yeah, but they were dropped, obviously, because initially the government must have been panicking, because if they hadn't, why would it even go there? Because obviously it means that probably what we are seeing here was a sort of creativity. Somebody was creating something that did not exist. Someone was trying to be innovative, imaginative, to the extent that he built a case that will nail Bobby Wine, in the sense that he could probably be charged with treason. Don't forget, by the way, that his driver was actually killed. We don't know specifically who killed him, but there is a lot of suspicion that whoever killed him probably may in fact have been agents of the state. They killed this man who was seated, by the way, in a passenger's seat, and there's speculation that the people who were assigned to do whatever they did thought or felt they were in fact taking out Bobby Wine.
Amanya, let's go to another commenter, Amanya Kevin. Bobby Wine once said, when leaders become misleaders and our mentors become tormentors, our position becomes the opposition. Opposition becomes our position. What do you think about that statement made by Bobby Wine in one of his songs?
I think it makes sense because when you have leaders, for example, like the incumbent Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who came, by the way, in 1986 in power, very, very enormously popular. And part of the reason, frankly, was that whatever he said, whatever he touched, it turned into gold because it was a reflection of the objective social, economic, political conditions at that point in time. He talked, for example, about African leaders who overstay in power. He said that, he was so contemptuous, sincerely, and you could even see it in his eyes, of leaders who essentially overstayed in power, became dictators and all that kind of stuff. But can you imagine that, ironically, 32 years later, this is the same man who is in power. And for him, he has a way of justifying it. Initially, he said the media misquoted him, that he did not really mean people who overstay in power, that he meant leaders who stayed in the power, perhaps without being voted for electorally. And yet, we know the history of his elections. In fact, a lot of information, when you look at it, it shows that this is a man, sincerely, who has carved out his career in a manner where some people say he suffers from a disease of having a pathological fear of fair competition, because he likes to compete against opponents whose hands are tied behind their backs, their feet tied together, while he is free. So he punches and says, Paul, can you please punch back? He just smiles at you because you can't.
Yeah, Shaka, you raised an issue that I want to go back to. Let's maybe I go to our audience. You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday. Shaka, let's go back to the comments. Let's go to Mexico. Salongo Atman, a Ugandan currently living in Mexico. He says, the political situation in my country worries me. How can Ugandans in the diaspora come out and help with our country, with whatever is going on in our country?
I think that it is a very good question that is being asked by Sarongo in Mexico. And I also think that he should consider himself, frankly, as a legitimate citizen of Uganda. And if he considers himself as a legitimate citizen of Uganda, then he has to know that he actually owes allegiance to the state, not to an individual authority. And therefore that Salongo should assert his constitutional rights, his inalienable rights. Others would call them birthrights. This is something that he can exercise within the context of the Ugandan constitution, Ugandan laws. He can, for example, express, for example, he is essentially democratic rights by writing letters to the media, by essentially sending messages of solidarity to those that are fighting for their constitutional rights in Uganda via, for example, Facebook, via Twitter, via some other social media platforms. He should also take some time in Mexico, where he is, to make friends for Uganda, especially in the context of free Uganda, really. Because let's face it, Uganda deserves a leadership. It deserves a government that respects its people, deserves a government that is not socially, politically, economically insensitive to its own daughters, sons, aunts, uncles, and grandpas and grandmas.
Shaka, it would be unfair to Ugandans if we didn't talk about the arrest and the potential arraignment of the former police chief in Uganda, General Kele Kihura, who was granted bail today. A lot of people look at that guy and say he was the terror. He was the institution that oppressed people in Uganda. But today, he was granted bail that he denied a lot of Ugandans.
It is very interesting that you mentioned General Kale Kayihura. By the way, General Kale Kayihura, it should be noted that he's not somebody who is blind when it comes to law, because not only does he, in fact, has a bachelor's of laws from Makerere University, your alma mater, he also has a master's degree in law to boot from the London School of Economics in London. He is an incredible guy, a guy who believed in social economic justice for all of us, to the extent that when he finished his law degree, he actually joined Yoweri Museveni in the bush because he was, at the time at least, fighting for social economic justice for Ugandans. And I applaud him for that. Unfortunately, when he got into power, he seemed to either have forgotten that or he seemed to have been misused, because whenever he committed certain things that you would call crimes and what have you, whenever he enforced certain orders and that type of stuff, he always said that the orders were from above. I don't know whether that above meant heaven. I don't know whether that above meant from his immediate supervisor, his immediate commander. After all, he's a military, and let's face it, there is no democracy or pretense of democracy in the military as an institution. You have to be very disciplined, and whenever your superior officer orders you to do something, you just have to salute and move on. But I think that in fairness to the Ugandan government, or at least the institution of the judiciary system, I like the idea that they are looking at General Kale Kayihura, despite his earlier pronouncements about people in similar situation not, at least in his particular case, not being eligible for either to be bailed out or bond or that kind of stuff. I think I like the fact that right now he's being treated sincerely the way anybody should be treated, which is taken through due process with respect and dignity, and to make sure that he's a beneficiary of what the Constitution says. He should, any person in his situation should benefit from. So I hope that in this process, along the way, he may actually begin to looking at the Uganda through different social, cultural, political lenses of experience.
Very briefly, so what do you, when you look at his current situation, what kind of advice would you give to people who are maybe in similar positions, who abuse power when they're in those positions? How can they, and maybe look at it broadly from an African context, how can they not misuse power when they are given positions of power?
I think first and foremost, what is key, frankly, is democracy. We need to embrace democracy in Uganda, in Africa, in the world. And you know why I say that, Paul? It is very simple. Because the last time I checked, democracy happens to be the only thing that you could actually characterize as an equal opportunity employer. Whether you are in power, or they say like that in Uganda, you are in charge and all that kind of stuff. You have all these privileges and what have you. Or whether you are out of the privileges and what have you, it still remains the only common denominator that is socially, environmentally, and legally friendly. As a matter of fact, I have a situation about Zimbabwe, where you and I spent about 2 weeks. You remember the founding Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, later to become President Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He ruled Zimbabwe for 37 years. For the first 20 years, it looked like it was very good, it was normal and what have you. And later things really became problematic, especially when he invoked, and probably rightly so, he invoked the land reform issue, which a lot of people say should actually have been done a long time ago, except that probably they have problems with the manner in which he invoked it. This is a man, for example, who had no respect in terms of democracy. it was okay for him to democracy to be on his side, but certainly not on the side of the opponents like the late Morgan Richard Changelai of MDC and all that kind of stuff. But can you believe that in the last few weeks when we were in Zimbabwe, he was in fact, guess what, the voice of democracy. He was in fact complaining that Zimbabwe, frankly, seems to be at least deteriorating democratically, because he obviously realized that democracy, at least as he knew it, was not on his side at that point in time. But guess what? If he had in fact realized this long time ago, he would have provided a democratic foundation of which he would in fact later would have become a beneficiary. So anybody, frankly, who thinks about rights and what have you, these rights are not for individuals, they're for all of us.
Shaka, we're almost running out of time. There are a lot of people who have died this year. Most notably, maybe I can talk about the late Senator John McCain, the former U.S. envoy to South Sudan, Princeton Lyman. Your thoughts on those two gentlemen?
Two great individuals. When you talk about, of course, Senator McCain was a legitimate American hero. He was also a man who was very politically independent-minded. Others called him maverick, you know, that kind of stuff. But I remember this man one day when he was campaigning for the presidency, competing against Barack Obama. There was a lady who was using very unpleasant language describing Obama. You cannot believe Senator McCain actually walked to this lady.
I remember that, yes.
Removed her microphone and said, no, Obama is a good American. He is a legitimate contender of the presidency, and it is up to the American people to choose who they want to be their president. So when I look at a man like McCain, and I look at a man like Princeton Lyman, by the way, in addition to being the special envoy for South Sudan or Sudan, he also was a distinguished diplomat in Nigeria and South Africa. He was very, very highly respected. So, in fact, someone told me yesterday that this is very unfortunate because these two gentlemen, they had the sort of skills, really, that the United States of America needs at this point in time.
Shaka, we have about a minute. Can you briefly talk about what you're talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
We'll be, tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa, we'll be, of course, talking about Bobby Wine. We'll also be talking about the late Kofi Annan, the first African, someone say, sub-Saharan Secretary General of the United Nations. And of course, he was able to distinguish himself during the 10 years he was there. And again, he will probably be best remembered, really, for helping to bring some kind of or semblance of peace, really, to the Republic of Kenya in 2007, 2008, when Kenya was on the verge of banning, really, because some elements had allegedly stolen election or tried to at least come up with a result that did not reflect the will of the people, but rather the will of either the people who counted the votes or the individual who announced the final result.
On that note, thank you so much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Acutely competent.